Welcome to the Spy Collection. I'm Anastasios and this is the fourth episode of this series where we go through the allegedly leaked US intelligence community documents. We want to remind you that we cannot assess the authenticity of those documents, the intention behind their public disclosure, or who is responsible for their release on social media. However, they are an excellent tool to study modern analytic tradecraft methodologies as well as document them for historical purposes for the case that they turn out to be unmodified original intelligence products. In this episode, we will be going through this specific document. As always, we have reconstructed it as accurately as we could in a widescreen format so that it's easier to navigate. On its top left, we have the insignia of the United States Joint Chief of Staff, which was the recipient of it, and on its bottom left, the insignia of its producer, the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. Actually, it even explicitly states that it was for J2. For anyone not familiar with a typical NATO military structure, there are 9 sections, as you see here, across all military levels. The second one is for intelligence and security. Also, the J in front of it means it was for the Joint Chief of Staff's Intelligence Directorate. This gives us a better clarity on who was receiving this. And now let's look at its classification markings. If you have ever heard media or movies using the term above top secret, this is what they mean. Technically speaking, there is nothing above top secret in the US government. It's the highest classification level. However, there are some markings placed along top secret, like the sensitive compartmented information called SCI, that even if you hold a top secret clearance, you cannot get access to them unless you are required to in order to complete your mission. That's the so-called need to know principle. Those compartments are marked with control markings. Here we see special intelligence, which is the control for sensitive intercepted communications compartments. The TK, or talent keyhole, is the control for the compartments related to spy satellites and overhead spying platforms. So what SI and TK are telling us is that the product that we're about to study, among others, contains intelligence gathered from spy satellites and sensitive interceptions of communications. The next marking, FGI, means that the foreign government, in this case Bahrain and Israel, provided some intelligence that is included here. The no foreign means that this was not to be shared with anyone outside of the United States. And finally, XDs stands for exclusive distribution and practically means that this information must not be shared with anyone that doesn't need to know it. It's typically used for highly classified material like intelligence shared between senior leadership of the US government and military that no one else should be aware of. Next, we have the I code that is telling us that the last piece of information prior to putting this intelligence report together was processed on February 28, 2023 at 5:15 Eastern Standard Time. The PCN refers to DIA's Product Control Numbering Database. It's DIA's way of tracking each intelligence product that they publish, like this one. And finally, its title was Israel, Pathways to Providing Lethal Aid to Ukraine. Notice that the title itself was unclassified. And in terms of categorization, this was an exploratory analysis. This is a more common type of intelligence product than people might think. Regularly, decision makers are asking their intelligence personnel to come up with what-if scenarios and identify the best course of action to achieve an objective. So, despite what many media outlets say about this product, this is quite common in the spy world. What we can deduce from this is that the US military really wanted Israel to provide lethal aid to Ukraine, and they asked their spies, the DIA, to find ways to do that. This doesn't mean that any of that would materialize. This is an exercise to give the decision makers some options, ideas and considerations that will drive their policies. Before we dive into the details, it's also worth covering this footer. Here we read that this was classified under the Director of Intelligence of J2, making him responsible for any changes to its classification as well as its exclusive distribution that we just covered. As we already mentioned, the input for this intelligence product comes from a variety of sources, and this is also written here, and it could be reviewed for potential declassification as per 50x1 Hume. For those not familiar, this means that this can remain classified up to 75 years because each disclosure could reveal the identity of a confidential human source. This is actually what the HAM stands for. This, along with the SI and TK compartments, clearly explains why it was classified as top secret before it became publicly available on social media. And here is the summary of this finished intelligence product. As we read, Israel has committed to providing non-lethal aid to Ukraine, comprised of intelligence, counter-UAS support, and a civil early warning system as it seeks to maintain its freedom of action in Syria by balancing its ties with the US and Russia. Prime Minister Netanyahu indicated Israel has considered providing Ukraine additional defensive systems and support at the United Nations. Jerusalem likely will consider providing lethal aid under increased US pressure or a perceived degradation in its ties to Russia as a result of Moscow's actions in Iran or Syria that undermines Israeli interests. And as you can read, this summary was also classified differently. It was secret, but with markings not to be shared outside of the United States and still maintaining the exclusive distribution we already covered. The product contains two sections. First, scenarios that could drive Jerusalem to provide lethal aid. The reference of countries by their capital is a common practice among foreign policy and intelligence agencies officials. DIA concluded with 4 potential scenarios and arranged them from the most to the least plausible. Note, once again, that the classification is different, matching the overall document's classification. One scenario was that Jerusalem adopts Turkish model for Ukraine aid. As we read, the scenario was that Israel adopts Turkish model under US pressure and sells lethal defense systems or provides them through third-party entities. It openly advocates for a peaceful end to the conflict and offers to host mediation efforts. And apparently, the DIA analysts also had to provide what's the basis, the background that this scenario is built upon. So the background was that Ankara has successfully maintained cordial relations with Moscow while facilitating arms transfers to Kiev. Jerusalem may believe it can similarly balance its ties. And that leads us to the second scenario, less plausible than the first. That is, Russia expands strategic assistance to Iran. Here we read that the scenario was that Russia transfers strategic systems such as the Su-35 flankers or SA-21s to Iran, or expands assistance to Iran's missile, nuclear, or space programs, prompting Israel to provide lethal aid. And the background was that the IDF is concerned Russia will provide advanced systems or technology, such as steel alloys or other material used in both missile and space programs, in exchange for Iranian weapons. The third one, which moves to the least plausible space, was that Israel expands outreach to the US for counter-Iran operations. Before we move further, in this one we didn't find the exact same photograph as the original document. Although the photos were stock, free, online photos, it's worth noting. Here is the original one, potentially from the same event in Syria, but different photo. The scenario here said that Russia continues to allow Iranian advanced conventional weapon systems through Syria, prompting Israel to request expanded US support for Israeli counter-Iran activities in exchange for lethal aid to Ukraine. And this was based on the following background. Israeli defense leaders are advocating for increased risk-taking to counter Iran, including proposing bilateral Israeli-US operations. Israel has regularly requested ATG overflights to support strikes in Syria. For this one, we can assume that ATG refers to the Atanf garrison US military base located in Syria, but we cannot be certain about it. Lastly, the least plausible scenario was the expanded adversary air defense presence and use in Syria, where Russia incurs casualties from Israeli strikes and begins directly targeting Israeli aircraft with surface-to-air missiles. Iran transfers advanced SAMs, such as the IRSA-2 or IRSA-3 to Syria, shifting Israel's calculus on lethal aid. And the background was that Israel periodically strikes Syrian and Iranian air defenses in Syria. In 2022, Russia fired an SA-21, likely for messaging purposes, after Israeli aircraft left Syrian airspace following a strike. This concludes the first portion of this finished intelligence product. We do not know what methodologies the DIA analysts utilized to produce that, but there is an entire toolset available for such material. For instance, one of the oldest and well-established methodologies is the ACE, the analysis of competing hypotheses, where intelligence analysts are documenting any potential hypothesis and then, through a series of revisions with different techniques, end up with the ones that are the most likely to happen. If you are interested in learning about ACE, please leave us a comment and we can publish a video dedicated to it. The important thing to remember is that those aren't some random thoughts and ideas. They are a result of analytic tradecraft by experts in those domains, based on multiple sources that provide evidence to support them. The next and final section was the Select Israeli origin weapons that could be transferred to Ukraine. And once again, the title was unclassified, but the actual content was top secret with the SI controlled system and not to be shared outside of the US. This part is DIA's bread and butter, knowing what weapons each country produces, the pros and cons, who uses them, etc. Since the creation of the DIA, creating material that lists such things have been a very common area for the agency. So it's not surprising that the DIA was able to identify the 3 best candidates that Israel could provide to Ukraine without complicating the relationship even further. It starts with Barak 8 MX surface-to-air missile. As we read, in use by Israeli Navy ground-based system, long 70 km and extended range 150 km variants. It's used by Azerbaijan, India, the United Arab Emirates, with Morocco scheduled to receive the system in mid-2023 and Colombia in 2026. All of that information is open source, so nothing particularly sensitive. But the structure of this card is interesting. First, it documents how or why Israel uses this weapon system, then some of its technical capabilities that could be beneficial to Ukraine and the US, and lastly, who else is using that today. The last point has likely dual purpose. First, since those countries could also be candidates to ship those weapon systems to Ukraine if Israel agreed, and secondly, it shows that this weapon system is already exported outside of Israel. The next recommendation was the Spider surface-to-air missile system. Israel export-only National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System equivalent, fires Israeli Python and Derby anti-aircraft missile systems with short 20 km and medium-range 50 km variants, and is used by Georgia, India, the Philippines, Singapore, Vietnam, and the United Arab Emirates. Czechia scheduled to receive the system in 2025. Once again, all the information listed here is also available via open sources. Well, almost all of it. The photo used originates from Rafael test range firing, but we couldn't find the exact one with the same angle as the one in the original DIA report that you see here. And finally, we have the Spike anti-tank guided missile. We read that is the Israeli Javelin equivalent, 4 variants with different ranges, 2 to 10 kilometers, and non-line-of-sight capability up to 35 kilometers. Exported to 27 countries, and Finland, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, and the United Kingdom can manufacture but not export the system. This one actually informs us of something that was potentially sensitive information. Most publicly available reporting stated that Spike non-line of sight can reach up to 32 km, but here we are reading 35 km. Also, before people try to oversimplify this and state that anyone could produce the same with a little bit of online research, see this. This is the official page of the manufacturer of this weapon, Rafael. It says that 39 nations are using it, but DIA assessed it cost 27. Intelligence reports aren't about copying numbers of what companies and people say. In this context, it's about finding the actual numbers, verifying their validity with multiple sources, and then reporting on them. This is why the DIA potentially used satellite imagery and even intercepted communications to build this finished intelligence product. And this concluded our review of this potentially leaked DIA intelligence report from 2023. As always, we are not in a position to verify its authenticity, why it was leaked, if all its information is complete, accurate, fabricated, or even fake. We are here to use it as an educational tool for people interested in military intelligence tradecraft. And if it turns out to be real, also have it in our spy collection for historical purposes. Hopefully, this gives you a better understanding of the work that is happening every day in the second directorate of most, if not all, NATO militaries, assessing all potential scenarios to progress the national security interests. And of course, those are what media call above top secret discussions, since they can put sources and methods at risk. From our side, it's hard to identify what human sources might be at risk here, but we also see only one part of the story. Imagine that you are an Israeli or Russian official and what you see as a scenario here is something you discussed with your equivalent of the J2 a few days ago. It won't be hard for people to connect the dots. And if that person turns out to be a DIA spy, their career, and in rare cases even their life, will be over. Of course, the moment anyone enters the spy game, they know the stakes are high and that nothing is as it seems.